Okay, good. Okay. When we get together, we're going to be talking about your writing. As Pat probably told you, that's the focus of things. Now, I just have developed a list of things I see people doing commonly as they're writing their proposals. And some of these things you probably already know. Some of them may be suggestions that are a little different than what you think. But let me give you a little feedback on this. Now, as we go along, when I see your dissertation proposal, we can talk about some of these problems in specific if you're doing them. But I think some of these you can avoid right now. So let's take a look here. I have a whole bunch of common errors. One of the biggest problems that I see is vacuous citation padding. I like the way that rolls off the tongue. This is where you provide citations. The world is round. Then you say Columbus, Finch, and go. And then I'd say, well, was that because Columbus said the world was round, or did he prove it, or was that an opinion he had? Was he summarizing that from other people? That's just dumping stuff in there to show us that you have citations. But they're vacuous. They are empty. They don't tell us anything, right? So, here's another one. Organization development professionals are essential assets for any growing firm. Then you put the four of these people here are the leaders in the field, right? And what are we supposed to think from that? Okay, that is a completely empty citation. That is an assertion of it's an opinion that you provide citations for. Did Tom Schermack say that? Is that his opinion? Did Dick Swanson actually do research on that? What is the point on this? Loading up a bunch of citations after a statement is nothing more than padding. It doesn't mean anything, and I will call you out on that every time, and I will ask you about that. Yeah.
Would it be better just to have one citation?
I think if it is. No, I would say, for instance, if you just had one there, I still wouldn't know what it meant. Okay. Because I don't know if it was just Schermack, I wouldn't know what Schermack did. See,
but if it was like word for word from their writing.
Well, yeah, if you had that, but see, this is kind of puts a little veil. It looks like it's scholarly, but it's actually doesn't identify intention. So for instance, what you would do with this case is you might tell us what they did. In other words, you might unpack. If you're talking about this statement, for instance, if this was a lead sentence in a paragraph, a thesis, I would take Schermack, Jacobs, McLean, and Swanson, and I'd say what they did and how they did it. Mm-hmm. Okay, because the evidence that you're providing at this point it's unknown. It's just saying, I'm saying this, and then a bunch of people, I don't even know what they did. Okay? So the way to do this is to try to kind of break it down. Now, sometimes people say, well, that's going to be a little bit longer, more writing. Well, if you think that Schermack, Jacobs, McLean, and Swanson have something important to say, you should make sure that you get that intention and that meaning into the paragraph that you're writing. So you cure this by explaining the viewpoint. So if it's you might want to limit the facts. You want to take a critical tack. The other thing that happens in here is that people put these kind of vacuous things in and they just add them up like they all meant the same thing. They don't. They're different kinds of evidence and different opinion from different viewpoints. And part of this is being able to differentiate, be analytical about that, and to be somewhat critical of these things too. So if you have something to say, make sure that we know what it is. If you make a reference to an authority, tell us how the authority arrived at that. Did that, for instance, is that McLean does all kinds of qualitative work. Is that the result of McLean's, analyses of 25 firms that he visited and, came away with that conclusion? It all is different. Okay.
Can I ask a question? So if this were the first, like, the thesis statement of a paragraph, and the paragraph were to go on to explain the evidence from these articles, I just clarifying, are you saying, so for the thesis statement of the paragraph, it would be unnecessary to have citations?
I think so, yeah. Okay. And you only use the citations when the citations can be directly attributed to the statement.
Okay.
In other words, we know what that means.
Okay.
Now, what this
It's a
does,
kind of summary statement.
what this does is say, well, yeah, I put those in there. Go look them up if you want. That's a long way around. I expect you to do the heavy lifting for me when I read your stuff, right? I might go back to that. In other words, if you told me that McLean summarized those things from 25 observations of firms, I might go back and look at that, and I might quibble with what McLean did. It would be a basis for me to do that.
But if you're just trying to add evidence for something you're going to write after this that's related to this, I mean, this just takes this is a bit. I mean, you wouldn't want to write a whole paragraph trying to explain why organizational developments are an essential asset, right? I mean, well, I mean, if you're trying to make your own point,
well,
I mean,
but that's as good as any other opinion. I mean, you need to be able to
just write it without
well,
referencing
I would
it
say,
and say that.
I would say
then they're gonna be like, how do you know it's an essential
that
asset?
is a very bold statement
Yeah.
without authority.
Yeah. If you said it by yourself, they'd be like, well, what proof do you have then?
Well, then I would say that's where you had. So
Oh,
you got to
okay.
tell the story in this case, okay? Just make sure that you don't, I often see this at the very beginning of a statement of a problem. This 25 references, this 25 references, this 25 references. And it looks really heavy. You got 3 sentences on the page, and the rest is all references. Looks, you read a lot. I put the meaning and intention of those citations. This is vacuous citation padding. Another thing that happens in dissertations is everybody they've got a favorite problem they're working on, and they have selective attention. The only thing they review are the arguments that make their point, when the world is filled with arguments and counter-arguments, right? And so it's not really fair to support your argument only by adding up all the friends you have on the argument and then neglecting all the others. For instance, if you're a person who studies charter schools and you're really in favor of charter schools, and all you cite are these positive things about charter schools, that may be good for the op-ed piece that you're writing for the New York Times, I suppose, or the Wall Street Journal. We were trying to persuade someone to believe that opinion. But in terms of a Fox News fair and balanced argument here, that's really not, doesn't meet it. So selective attention is one of the things that leads you to kind of what I would characterize as a non-problem. In other words, you're trying to build up a problem based on without a balanced view. So this is another thing to avoid in your writing. Cliff notes, level of detail. Simple summaries of what might be complex ideas. I mean, I'm all in favor of being able to understand what you read, but sometimes things are more nuanced and complex. So you need to make sure that you portray that in your writing. And you need to be sophisticated enough to do that, not just to say, for instance, to make like the last statement we had about work being essential. It's just kind of a breezy statement. You want to make sure that you kind of dig in. So for instance, I'll give you an example. When Dr. Rothwell reviews dissertations, he gets really annoyed when he reads reviews of literature where people just kind of say, Smith found this, Metzger found this. And he gets really annoyed and says, well, what did he do? Who did he study? He wants to know the details and what you thought about that. And was there a flaw in terms of the internal and external validity of those conclusions? He wants a critical point of view. So avoid the kind of real breezy cliff notes in this case. Okay, I get a lot of papers, a lot of times that I'd say 3/4 of the paper is direct quotation. No, it's not going to work. When you overly rely on direct quotations, you might as well let us just read the other things. Okay? I've seen, I think it was an extreme about 2 years ago, about 2/3 of chapter 1 was nothing but long quotations from books and things with little linking paragraphs in between. That's not going to fly here. So don't rely too much on, an overwhelming amount of direct quotation. Now, as Brian was saying, sometimes what somebody said is really important. And you want to get that down, and you think it's really a good way to do that. I think that's a good reason to use a direct quotation. So, for instance, a definition, a conclusion that's stated in a particular can be a criticism. I think that sometimes if that amplifies and helps to clarify what you're talking about, that's great. But pages and pages of direct quotations won't fly. Okay, you're probably not going to do this. This is where you directly use other words as your own or presenting other ideas as your own. Probably we see very little of the direct plagiarism, but a lot of times you'll have, as a matter of fact, I think it was, who's the guy who runs Russia? It's like Putin or something like that, right? Putin, I guess that's his name. He wrote he has a doctoral degree.
Yeah.
In mineral, not mineral, but is in oil and gas economics from the University in St. Petersburg. And it turns out, isn't it funny, that people dug into his dissertation and found the second type of plagiarism in his paper. He had vast areas in his dissertation where he had just kind of rephrased things from other people and called them his own. I guess he runs the country now, though, and it worked out somehow. But anyhow, the second type is a little more common, I would say. When you first write something, I think it might be useful. You can try to rephrase things and all that. That's not a matter. But if you're taking the sentence where they use the word actually, and you turn that into really, then that's really where you get the difficulty. So just be careful about that. When you have a fact, tell us where you got the fact. I often see a lot of facts that are uncited. The unemployment rate was high. Most schools are in urban areas. It's not, I don't know about that. Where did you find that? When did that occur? Who said that? Which schools? In Latvia? I don't know. So, tell you the citation is necessary. When you have a fact, tell us where you got the fact from. And sometimes it's necessary to present some evidence. So, for instance, we have people working on unemployment. Unemployment's changed over time. Maybe you show a graph that you got from someplace where you actually have the data. So citations to the facts are really important. When you make an empirical statement, back it up. Okay, I see this a lot. Reverend Dr. Rothwell gets this quite a bit in dissertations here, but also we see this quite a bit. Here's the I can tell when it's coming is when you use a person's first name in your dissertation. William Rothwell, a professor at such and such, or Richard Swanson. This is a clear cue that you're trying to make an appeal to authority. He's saying, a big person said this. They're pretty cool. I'm telling you, they said it, so you better believe it, but it's right. That lacks critical perspective. Bill Rothwell is a leader in HRD, but what he said about competency modeling is important because of the way, what he pulled together. We very rarely, very, very, very rarely refer to an author by first name. Very rarely are we going to refer to their gender. Okay, you try to kind of modify that. So this appeal to authority really lacks a critical perspective. It shows that you're kind of weak on the argument. So
could you say that again? Is it rarely we refer to his gender and just he said?
Yeah.
So maybe tying some things together.
Yeah, like Rothwell said, or I try to avoid the he and she sorts of things. Often people, sometimes we run into situations where people want to say he or she. The easier way to do that is to make the sentence plural, so they, those situations.
Right,
so it's better, you don't want to call reference to the person of the work other than the citation to the work. You don't want the reader to cast an evaluation because of who's saying what that you're referring to. This overlaps with a lot of the other things we've talked about, the absence of an analytical perspective. There's similarities and differences among ideas, and you need to organize them that way. Not, and this, I'm kind of thinking, I've heard Bill Rothwell rant about this in oral examinations many times, where a student just has nothing more than a bunch of summaries, one after the other. About 25 years ago, I was at a college of education function. Behind me was one of our doctoral students, talking louder. I guess it was because of the wine that was at the thing, talking louder than they usually do. And the student said, one student said to the other, said, "I'm going to start working on my review of literature." And the student, my target student, said, "Oh, that's not a problem. I went over to the library, it took me an afternoon, they just copied a bunch of stuff out, put the summaries from the abstracts in, and that was a review of literature."
Alrighty then.
How'd that work? Well, this is why, the compare, contrast, as you're building things up. If somebody's a little bit different, you're using a concept differently. Make sure you have that kind of nuance and differentiation in there. It's not all peaches and cream. Just because it was published doesn't mean that it's great. You have to take a critical, analytical perspective, break down the parts. When somebody's talking, here's a favorite in this department, work engagement. I know we used to have 65 dissertations on work engagement. That seems like, I guess it's the only thing that we can do right now, right? So everybody's working on work engagement. Is work engagement, work engagement, work engagement? I don't know about that. A lot of people talk about work engagement in different ways. When I look at the literature, I see people have different points of view on that. They, measured it differently. All that is part of the body of work that you have to be able to sift through and understand. It's not quite so simple. The whole body of literature is more nuanced. It differs in its qualities, differs in its target and appropriateness for things. So, you got to get analytical. Analytical is to break things down into its parts, reassemble them in terms of commonalities and differences. Secondary sources. I see this every semester. Somebody wants to talk about the unemployment rate, they point to the New York Times. New York Times isn't the source of unemployment data. Bureau of Labor Statistics is. Okay? You want to go to the primary rather than secondary sources, not what somebody said. An example also is that Bill Rothwell said in his book that some guy said this. Well, why don't you look up and see what the other guy said? Maybe Rothwell's completely screwed it up, right? Right? Yeah, it could, right? I mean, we all, he has a point of view on this thing. Why take that source and not read the source that's important? That's a problem.
But if you do like a block quote and you're quoting from someone and in their quote has some secondary source, you don't have to do anything with that necessarily.
You don't have to do it, except that would you accept it? If that secondary source is important to your argument, I'd say get back to the secondary source.
Okay, still go back there.
Yeah.
I mean, for the dissertation.
Direct quoting a paraphrase that's referenced. So it's a direct quotation, they're paraphrasing.
Well, there are reasons you would do this. All I can say is that if the argument depends on the thing that's a secondary source, I'd say go back to the primary source.
So if it's important to the
discussion. If it just happens to be in the middle of something, I'd say that's it. Now, the other thing that comes up in this, so for instance, do we have the original, is there an original, when Aristotle published Ethics, did he go through a publishing house and get McGraw-Hill pick it up and get, it didn't happen, right? And so there are translations, there's people who said what Aristotle said from translation, there are translations from pieces. Those are okay, but you'll want to be careful and maybe you want to check and make sure that they're okay. So there are lots of things, historical items that are no longer available and they're only available in secondary source. Also, sometimes people will cite secondary sources, things that are not published. Well, unpublished items are really tough to deal with. things that are really not available in the corpus of articles. And we have an internet now. You can practically find every cough that every person ever made at a conference. It used to be not that way. So if you can find it, you can cite it. But, if it's really obscure, it's historical, no longer available, you really need to think, what's the value of that citation, that secondary source? How is it going to help me out? And if there's an unpublished piece of work, and I've read it someplace, how do I know what it is? So it all has to do with the quality of what you're doing in terms of primary over secondary sources. Overuse of the passive voice. Technical writing usually try to speak directly not using active voice. I've even seen people in technical writing have research articles that are presented in the present tense. And the reason they do that is because, you may have completed your research the last year, but they write the method section in the present tense so that you are engaged with the flow of things. And some of these things are tough to carry off and they're risky. But you need to remember that, my favorite in dissertations is the author then did this. I say, who's that? Who's that guy? Who's the author? And you're talking about yourself. Well, rewrite the sentence. Say, I did this. And then you'll look at that and say, boy, that sounds hokey. And you'll eventually get rid of the I. Okay, but part of the passive voice is to put you it sounds like you're talking about the problem from the House of Commons, some long distance away. So just get used to trying to write actively. The verbs carry the punch, the adjectives and adverbs, you try to minimize as much as you can. You try to say directly, Joe said this, it was said by Joe. There's a considerable range of expertise demonstrated by the spam senders. The spam spenders are actively demonstrating, right? So to rewrite that, the spam senders becomes the subject of the sentence. Their demonstration is what they're doing. The one up in the top is that, I don't know, it's kind of really removed. We were invited by our neighbors to attend their party. The proposed initiative will be bitterly opposed by abortion rights groups. Abortion rights groups are going to do something. Their abortion rights groups will bitterly oppose the initiative. The abortion rights groups are taking the action by opposing bitterly the initiative, which is the object. See, so this is kind of bass-backwards. I think it's technical too. So,
I'm pretty sure that's in the APA.
It is in the APA, and it is semi-lexicon there. So, okay. Another thing that comes up a lot is consistency. If you're going to call them career and technology schools, do that. If they're career and technology institutes, do that. Then don't change it to schools that focus or technology and career schools. So when you have a term, stick with it. And the reason for that is that the readers kind of salivate when they see it again. They say, oh, I know what he's talking about. He used that before, right? And that's, so consistency is important. And when you actually get near the end of writing your proposal, that's all part of the coherence thing. Looking at things. Sometimes as you're writing a long document, you'll find that the document evolves, and pretty soon it has a different character at the end. Yeah.
Is there a continuum between consistency and using the same terminology versus being redundant?
And being boring instead of? Well, I would say that if you're going to have an important term and you've defined the term, I would continue to use it that way. It's kind of like using an acronym. Once you use it, make sure you use it consistently all the time. Yeah. So that's something we see quite a bit of, and I'd say it's quite natural. As you start writing your paper, you'll find as you write it, your perspective and understanding changes, and all of a sudden your point of view begins to change a little bit. And the document you end up with is a little different. This happens in reviews of literature quite a bit. So you have to really put a rope around your writing. Every once in a while, this may be procrastination. I'm sure it is. But one of the things that I do, and I know it's procrastination, but usually when I'm writing something I've been away for, finish it the day before, the first thing I do is I come back and I read through it. Now, sometimes that's a pain in the butt for me because when I read through it, I get caught up and all of a sudden I'm trying to revise things. But when I look at that and all the way through, I begin to make sure I get the same perspective. And sometimes I realize I've shifted perspectives and I'll try to fix that. So this is, consistency is really important as we go along here. Okay, a young girl was walking the dog in a short skirt.
It's a fancy dog.
I haven't seen a dog like that, but I wish I had one. Okay, now I don't know. You might be walking a dog that has a short skirt. If it is, say what you mean. And maybe they're talking about a young girl in short skirts walking the dog. Okay, so now we know by the proximity of that prepositional phrase there that it's close to the girl. And so I have a flaw like this all the time. And for some reason, I goof things up. I'd be writing things, and I often put the time reference something near the end of the sentence. I even did it 3 times today. I have to convert that so that I get all the things that refer to the noun or the verb kind of close to them. Proximity in the sentence means a lot. So these are kind of crazy examples here. The dog was chasing the boy with a spiked collar. Entirely possible too, right? I mean, if you had punks in your family, I suppose that would work. But usually the spiked collars are on the dogs, okay? So again, say what you mean, and by the word order and placement of words, you get precision out of that sentence. So write what you mean. No contractions in technical writing. No don't, can't, don't use don't, can't use can't, shouldn't use shouldn't. Okay. No contractions. Okay, central part of subject verb plurality agreement. Central part of my life goals have been to go to law school. What's the subject of that sentence? You can yell it out. The part. The part, okay, let's get rid of my goals. The central part have been to go to law school. See, a lot of times we're affected by the word in a prepositional phrase that's close to the verb. So this is something to watch out for. It happens very easily because, again, when you write things out, you have trouble with that. So central part of my life has been to go to law school. Each of these designs coordinate with the others. Each, singular, the verb coordinate is plural. Each of these designs coordinates with the others. The mistake is made here because coordinate looks like it's close to designs. And in more complex sentences, this can be a problem. Johnson was one of the athletes who was disqualified. Okay, the who refers to the athletes in this case. So this is just a little, when you're writing quickly, but this happens and it happens to all of us, but as you go through, make sure that you get these agreements down. They get to be really troublesome along the way. You fix them up once, you're okay. But if you let them sit in there and you don't get in the habit of fixing these things up, you'll spend a lot of time fixing them later. Animating the inanimate. Okay. Tables can't do things. Inanimate objects can't do things. Tables don't conclude anything. Figures don't demonstrate. They don't display anything. Okay? Okay, they don't take action. So, and this is particularly useful when you're writing your paper because when you talk about a table, for instance, now this is one place where you do need to put a little distance. Shown in table 2, displayed in figure 1. Okay, but figure 1 doesn't show. The graph doesn't conclude. The table, no. So there's no, avoid animating the inanimate in your writing. Okay, here, professors met the students in the garden. They were interested in playing chess. Who? And this is a very common problem that I see in proposals. Okay, you talk about something, but we don't know the referent. I've gotten to the point where I try not to use reference like they, theirs, or anything like that. For instance, you might reword that sentence. So professors met the students in the garden. We don't know whether the professors, the students, or both of them are interested. Both groups were interested in playing chess. The students and the professors were, it's a little kind of redundant in a way, but at least I know who's doing the thing, right? Or maybe I just say the professors wanted to play chess. I'd be right, but I know who we're talking about. So a lot of times the cure to this is to rethink every time you write a sentence, and in the next sentence you say it, they, theirs. Does the reader unambiguously go back to the previous sentence and know who you're talking about? And sometimes you'll find that it's easier to word a sentence so that you repeat the referent, the exact name again. And it does work. So this doesn't communicate at all. I don't know what to make of that. I don't know whether I can't even imagine professors wanting to play chess in the garden with students. Okay, there was a professor, students, imprecise language. This comes up when we start talking about methods and variables. So I sat in on a final oral examination 30 years ago. It's so long ago, the person's retired. And they were doing a study that required them to monitor heart rate. Now, heart rate, I don't know. I think I know what heart rate is. But is that the number of arterial pulsations per minute? Okay. How is that? It's kind of like when we talk about achievement. When we say achievement, what is achievement? Is it a test score? Is it an accomplishment? So all of this is just, when you start talking, communicating with researchers, you have to have more precise language. Here's one that age. We measured the person's age, included. What is it? Their age at their last birthday? Is it their age in energy years? Is it the number of months they've been alive? Is it the age they told us they were? Is it the age I found in their administrative records? Is it the age I calculated from their response? I mean, all these are different. Some of you have taken the data analysis course. I know that the census, I told the story about the Census Bureau. One of the problems the Census Bureau used to have is that they would go out and ask people their age at their last birthday. And as people got older, in their 70s or 80s, they found out that people were mostly around 70, 75, and 80. And this was really goofing up because they use the census data to figure out the life tables to figure out what your insurance. They said, why do people seem to die? They die someplace in between 70 and they're all clumped up and then they die in between. Well, the fact is that when people are older, they often rounded their years up to the nearest 5 years. For instance, this May, I will be 70 years old. Okay? However, my wife doesn't like me describing that I'll be in my 8th decade. Kind of makes her look old. But it's all little shades of difference in there. So when you're reviewing literature, referring to variables, especially in the methods section, precise language is really important. Now, this is the one that completely drives me nuts. If you look at dissertations that have been approved in this department, I didn't even want to look at them because they just bothered me so much. They'll have in chapter 1, they have a problem, purpose, and then there'll be a section that says definitions. But what? We don't even know, definitions about something in chapter 3. Often the definitions that are there are completely about things, response rates or something. I don't know what what does a response rate need to be at that point? When you're writing about definitions, you need to consider the reader. When the reader sees a word that you think may be technical, specific, or you want the reader to understand it, define it right there. So right after you use the word, you'd say, by achievement, I mean. And that is the reader. Because when I read a document and I read something, a word that I don't understand, I have to stop. And I have to go and find that. And it completely derails the idea. So definitions. Another thing we see in dissertations from our department, this is why it's not good to look at. It's really not good for me to look at them either. Stating assumptions. There'll be a section in chapter 1 where the assumptions are laid out. About what? We don't know what assumptions. We haven't told us what you're going to do, anything about this. And I'm supposed to come back to that later and read about it? It doesn't work at all. Same thing with limitations. So if you have an assumption that you're making, for instance, in an assumption that's about a methodological, tell us right there. When you write about the thing, tell us what the assumption is. Quibble with it a little, to say why you're taking that assumption. It makes sense to the reader at that point. The paper is not about you. The paper is about the person who's reading it. Okay. Limitations, the same thing. I opened a dissertation and somebody said, the limitation in this study is that you can't get everybody to answer a questionnaire. I said, well, who said you're going to use a questionnaire? What questionnaire? I don't know what that means. So, for instance, when you're right, if you're going to use a survey approach and you're talking about acquiring response, you can say one limitation might be, or when you're reporting the results, one limitation was. It's when I need to know about it. And so you have to anticipate all that. So having separate sections, you will hear a lot from me if you have a separate section of definitions, assumptions, and limitations. Maybe your committee likes that. Fix it for them later. I just can't bear looking at it. And I don't think it makes any sense. I think eventually, if you don't have those, people will be certain. The other thing is that information and vocabulary requirements. Remember, I'm your reader. I don't know all the things you're doing. You have a committee. Maybe your committee understands very clearly what you're doing, or maybe some of them are unclear. But you generally have to get a gauge of the sophistication of the reader. So, for instance, if you were trying to explain you have the Thanksgiving dinner as a handout at the Thanksgiving, it's favors at the Thanksgiving dinner. You have a little explanation of the methods you used in your dissertation. Everybody in the family is curious about this at Thanksgiving dinner. And so you put that out. Well, you'd have to write it in a particular way so that people could consume that along with the turkey. So they'd have particular requirements. However, for instance, there's some things in methodology that are very common statistical techniques. You'll have to assume that, for instance, your committee will know what a t-test is. They know what a hypothesis test is. These are things that you do. That's good.
Very excited.
Do you remember? It's the one thing it hits.
Still in the head.
All right. Well, you have to kind of gauge that. So there's a technical level. For instance, if you're writing in the New York Times, you couldn't use technical terms. But if you're writing in the journal, in the Human Resource Development Quarterly, there's certain things you have to be able to gauge in terms of the readership. So you have to anticipate the reader's needs all the way along. And sometimes that means explaining some things. Some things you'll have to kind of test out. I think some things you'll have to know who the readers are. But generally speaking, the readers for your dissertation proposal, close your eyes and get a mental image of your committee. If that's not too horrifying. But think about what they know and what they do. And they really, I'm on a lot of committees, I don't have a clue about what the subject matter is about. I'm willing to learn. But you got to, have to be able to you have to kind of gauge that toward me. You have to consider the reader. So, no sections that have definitions, limitations, and assumptions. None. Inform us when we need to know that. Okay. Now, this PPT is out and available on Piazza right now. You can download it and use it. I think we have a video of this, of an older version of this. I'll put that up there too. But what I've tried to do today are two things. First of all, to skim over the top of the expectations in the course. Your immediate number one item is that you need to start on task number 1 and get that done before Sunday. Sunday's the due date. And we'll work from there. The next thing that's due after that is the proposal shell. So you have plenty of time now. If you want to procrastinate a little bit by thinking about this, that's good. And but begin focusing on the things you have to do. And pretty soon we'll be able to have tutorials. If you have writing done, I'll be able to consult with you on that. But I think it's worth your time to spend the hour or so, or maybe a little longer, to make sure you understand completely what's in the syllabus and is writing. The other thing I've done is I've focused twice today in major ways on the idea of writing. Writing is the product of this course. Writing is the ultimate product of your program. A dissertation is done in English. It's got to be really good. Okay? It's got to be great writing. Great writing. It's a Trump phrase. You talk that way. Trump talks that way. So I like to be old. Yeah, I like to be old. Okay, so that's really that. From now on, though, it's all about you. All about you. Because your proposal is very unique. It's a little bird by itself. It's just a little snowflake that I'm going to look at and shovel up along the way. So come see me, all right? You ready?
Hey, Dr. Passmore?
Okay, thanks. That's it.
Dr. Passmore, can you hear me?